Welcome everyone to our training class here on the Hoops web platform and using it within the Microsoft Azure ecosystem. My name is Jonathan. I am a developer relations specialist here at TechSoft. I work in the marketing team, but my background is software development, and so we'll get a chance to kind of walk you through some of our technology today. So for those people who aren't familiar with TechSoft, we make software development toolkits specific for 3D engineering, and we have a variety of toolkits to fit your needs. Today we'll be focused on the Hoops web platform, and we'll be focused on the Hoops communicator specifically, which is part of that. But there's a variety of other tools that we have at TechSoft for data access and visualization on desktop and mobile. So we're just focusing on a small bit of that today. This is meant to be a hands-on training class. So you're meant to follow along with us. There's a number of different prerequisites that I sent out in an email last week to get started, but mostly we'll be working with the Hoops web platform. Hopefully you've downloaded that. I'll kind of go through those prerequisites shortly here, as well as a few other tools that we'll be using. So again, it's meant to be hands-on training, so you'll get a chance to follow along. We'll talk about prerequisites, the Hoops web platform, specifically Hoops communicator, and then we're going to be writing some code and deploying to Azure. So hopefully you're set up with an Azure account and you'll be able to follow along as well. We're going to look at a couple different instances in which you can push to Azure. So first, just a static web page that is able to visualize 3D content. Then we'll step it up a bit with using the Azure App Service, and that is going to leverage a Node.js server that serves HTML, proxies, WebSocket requests, and then also allows you a bigger infrastructure to build upon. And then if time allows, we'll also show you how to stand up a virtual machine and be able to deploy the Hoops web platform to that. And then we'll wrap up with a couple things to look forward to coming up next month as well. So let's just take a look at the prerequisites. And what I'm going to do is grab those from my notes here, and I'm going to throw those in the chat just so that everybody's going to be on the same page here. So that you guys have everything that we need. All right. So a couple things there. We're going to be using Visual Studio Code to be writing our code, as well as a plugin to Visual Studio Code called Azure Tools. I just posted some links there. If you haven't downloaded those yet, please do. And we'll be using those, as well as the Hoops web platform. So a couple things will work there. If you go to our website, techsoft3d.com, and you've signed up for an evaluation recently for the Hoops web platform, that should work just fine. Or if you've downloaded it from our developer zone, if you're an existing partner of ours, downloaded the Hoops web platform, then that'll work, or Hoops communicator. So they're really pretty similar. Just one is a zip file and one has an installer. One thing that I didn't include in my email, so this is really important, we are going to be using the Node package manager and Node.js. So you will need to download and have that installed if you don't have that on your system already. We'll wait for you to do that. You don't see links in the chat. All right, thanks for that. So let's see what we got. Yeah, I sent that to all panelists, so let's send it to all attendees. Thanks for bringing that out. Like I said, this is a learning process. And so there you go. Thanks, and please feel free to raise your hands, send me a chat, and ask questions. This is meant to be an interactive session. So let's try to make it as interactive as possible. I know in this day of virtual everything, it can be a little daunting. But I'm happy to work with you on that. I also have a little poll because I want to learn a bit about everybody and just kind of understand what we'll be working on today together. And let me try to pull that up here. Just about what your background is. So I'm going to start this poll. I'm going to launch the poll for everybody. While those things are downloading, it gives us an opportunity just to get to know you a little bit. I'm just curious if you're a partner of ours. That means a customer. We call our customers partners. If you've used Communicator before, if you've used Azure before, and particularly if you'll be following along, that's like the most important question. Sometimes it's nice just to sit back and take a look at the technology, and sometimes it's nice to be following along. And both are okay. Yeah, sorry, Dave. When installing Node.js, it says close all programs. That shouldn't be necessary during the installation. You don't have. Yeah, just kidding, right? Little humor there. You should be good. All right, looks like I'm gonna. Thanks for taking the poll, and I'm gonna give it just another second. If you haven't finished it, we're gonna end that poll. It looks like we'll have a bunch of people following along today, so that's awesome. We'll try to pace it as such. I'm gonna share the results with everybody here. So a lot of people that we have relationships with, so that's great. Nice to see everybody. A couple new people as well. Some familiarity with both our technology and Azure App Services. I gotta definitely put a caveat in here. So I am not an expert. It looks like we have people that are familiar with Azure. I am not an expert in this space. However, we get a chance to kind of take a look at how our technology fits in with the Azure technology. Cross our fingers. Hopefully everything today goes off without a hitch, but there's always a gotcha. So we'll try to work through that together. All right, so got the poll done. Dave's downloading Node.js. It's about 10 after. Let's take a look at first the Hoops web platform, and then we'll kind of look in and take a look at how this starts to fit in with Azure as well. So you could be using one of two things. You could have downloaded the Hoops web platform from our main website, or you could have downloaded Hoops Communicator. They're essentially the same thing. And I'll show you Hoops Communicator. If I open up this folder, it's a zip file I downloaded from our developer zone. You see we have a server, we have quick start, we have some data, or that might be my folder. We have the web viewer code. And don't worry about Node.js. We're not going to get to that for a little bit, Dave. But yeah, just be patient with that install. And then the Hoops web platform installer installs a bunch of prerequisites, including Node, kind of our own flavor, not our own flavor of Node, but a version of Node as well gets packaged in with this. But same directory structure. So you could be using either of those, and it should be just fine. I'm going to be using Hoops web platform that had the installer, and that includes, in fact, just the Hoops Communicator 2020 here. Most recent version is 2021. You should be fine running either of those versions, so that's not a big deal. This training class is not meant to be a in-depth class around Communicator and the web platform, but I'm going to go over just a few of the main parts of it. If you want a deeper dive into Communicator, which is our cloud and web-based graphics engine and CAD Access Toolkit, we'll be having a class dedicated to that next month on March 11th. So this is really just showing you how do you take these SDKs and deploy a web app to Azure. If you want a deeper dive, check that out. We also have some content on our YouTube channel that goes through that as well. It'll be kind of a rebroadcast of that content on March 11th. But I do want to kind of show a couple main things here that we'll be using. So Hoops Communicator has two main components. If we go to our web viewer, one of these two main components is the Hoops web viewer sample HTML, which leverages particularly our Hoops web viewer JS and WebAssembly. So this is the graphics engine that runs within your browser that's able to visualize 3D data. So we have our main JavaScript files here, and then an HTML that references that JavaScript file. So if I come in and just inspect this, you'll notice that we reference these JavaScript files here, and then we spin up a instance of the web viewer, more or less right inside here, the window on load. And we have a sample that kind of does some heavy lifting and queries some parameters that get passed to the web page, and then spins up that exact class, the JavaScript script class. So we're gonna close that. So that's kind of on the client side. Now on the server side as well, we have some technology that now takes CAD data, converts it to a kind of thin streamable form, and then streams it down to the client. We're just going to look at the streaming technology. We're not going to go into the conversion technology. And so mainly, if I go into my bin folder here, you'll see a couple executables and some DLLs. These get run on this server. Now I'm using Windows. We're kind of looking at the Azure system. So I'm using Windows tools. All of this is available on Linux. So you could be using the same thing and use the applications on Linux and actually pushing to a Linux instance on Azure, and that's perfectly fine. We're just going to be using Windows today. One main one we're going to be using is this TS3D SC, which stands for Stream Cache Server, and this is an executable that streams data down to the client. The client, that JavaScript unpacks that data and visualizes it. And then we also have a server that kind of manages multiple instances. We're not going to be looking at that today. Serves up, does a bunch of load balancing and managing instances of the TS3D Stream Cache server. But we'll be looking at this one today. And then if you wanted to author data, we have this folder, this authoring folder that includes a conversion executable that takes CAD data and creates stream cache data that can be streamed down. So what does this look like? We actually have a referenced implementation that allows you to kind of see it in action locally, and we'll be taking parts of this and pushing it to our own projects today. So first thing I want to do is, you can follow along here, is just start server.bat, which launches a Node.js Express server. So Express is a Node package, pretty common, that serves up HTML and creates a pretty easy to work with web server. that's extensible, and we'll be using Express in a bit here. So it starts up our server, and what I'm going to do, yeah, which folder was the server bat in? So start server.bat. I'll kind of, am I still sharing my screen? I want to make sure about that. Should be. Yeah, I'm screen sharing. Yep. So server.bat is here in the quick start folder. Great. Okay. What that ends up running, if I come back here and I go, I'm just going to show you what it references, is goes into server, goes into, I believe, node. We have a config file here that kind of configs the server. You see our node modules that are just distributed with the project. But here in our lib directory, we have a number of JavaScript files that creates our server, does some logging, creates, kind of spawns out different instances of the stream cache. So this is kind of where all of our main logic, and it's pretty extensive. I want to simplify it for everybody today. So I'm going to go back to quick start. So the server's running. It's running as an executable here locally. I'm going to go into index.html, which just kind of shows you a couple different iterations of our technology. This is just a local file, but what's important is I'm going to come in here and let's say start up client-side rendering of our BNC connector here, or maybe even like, how about this? We'll start off big with our 12-story apartment building. So a couple things are happening here. I just want to show you that it's running on localhost, and when we ask the server for an instance, it gives me a port starting at 11.180. So it's serving HTML and WebSocket data if it needs it on that port. It loads, remember, the hoops web server sample.html, and throwing in a parameter there, it gives me a file to load. So I can do different things here if I wanted to. I could say BNC .ses, and it loads the BNC guy there, BNC connector. Now what this is doing, and there's two different types of files that you can load. You can either load an SCS file or an SCZ file. And you'll find that data here, kind of in our quick start. You have SCS models. So these are just a collection of sample models that you can load. Notice we have BNC, and Arbolito was that apartment building. We have them in this SCS format, and we have them in this SC or SCZ format. Same file, just a different extension. The difference between these, the SCS file is a non-streamable file, and it's requested and received just as an HTML request, just kind of like a block file, and it's downloaded kind of locally into your memory and then visualized immediately. It's not streamed. There's no WebSocket connection to a streaming server. The SCZ file, however, is streamed bit by bit, large surfaces first, down to the client using that TS3D server. So there's just two different flavors, and we're going to be showing how to use those in different contexts in just a minute here. The difference, though, if I close this and open up, instead of the client-side rendering SCS, so that's kind of like the blob, it gets downloaded and visualized. You can do this client-side rendering streaming, and what you should see is it kind of stream in. Now it's all local. It's not a huge file. You probably don't see that kind of streaming in, but it does bring in kind of the large slabs first and then moves on to the windows. So two different types of ways of bringing data in. The real advantage to SCS, that blob package of data, is it doesn't require as much infrastructure. It's pretty simple to use. The benefit of the streaming technology is I can load much larger models. I actually can clamp the memory that I'm using on my local machine. If I have a massive model, I could just limit it to, say, half a gig worth of memory usage, or a quarter, and just stream in the data that I'm allowing my client to visualize and swap it out. It also gives you immediate visualization, so the large parts are brought in first, and gives you immediate interaction with the data as the smaller parts are downloaded and brought in as well. All right, so that is that. We're going to kind of close out of that and start looking at Azure now. So to create, all right, so here's a good question. So thanks for the questions. To create an SC or SEZ file, you have to take an existing CAD file and convert to one of these. You just can't load a CAD, say a step file. How long does it take to create an SC or SEZ file? All right, awesome question. Let's just answer that, okay? Real quick. So I'm gonna go back to Quick Start, and there's also this bat file here called convertfile.bat. And I also have just a collection of CAD files. What I'm gonna do is, let's see, what CAD file do I want to work with? So you do have to convert them. We can't just load a step file. I'll go into my, let's look at some data here. So I have a collection of data, and I have some MCAD data here. And what do I want to convert? Let's see. This is let's see, the hammer drill is a pretty solid one. So the hammer drill is kind of a demo data set that we have. It's a Pro-E assembly, and just kind of take a, oh, no, it's not local. Let's look at, I'm sorry, that's not local. It's in Dropbox. It's fast. So that's the first thing I want to say. It's fast. I'm going to look at just some demo data. I'll get the biggest file that we have in our demo data that's launched with your package. So under communicator, let's look at authoring, and in converter, we have our examples. We have our data. So actually the Arboleda is pretty solid, but let's look at our Modo engine. So this is also a Pro-E assembly. It's got multiple parts, multiple sub-assemblies. In terms of just like general size, we're looking at 50 megabytes. So it's like a medium-sized model. But what I'm going to do is have my this is my top level assembly file there. And I'm also going to bring up my quick start folder here. And I'm going to just drag Modo in here and cover it, push it on top of convert file, and hope that my license file is valid. So it looks like it is. So it just goes through this conversion process. It loads the file. Convertfile.bat is a bat file that runs a Python script that basically just launches this converter.exe file and goes in and converts that whole assembly. It does a bunch of things. There's a number of command line arguments that extract measurement data and extract metadata, but here it's been converted into my SC file there. So pretty fast. That's kind of a whole other topic that we'll get into, but it's pretty fast to convert these. We're talking about, even for some of my largest assemblies, like I have a Pro-E assembly that's hundreds of files. It's a race car, and I think it's like 600 megabytes, and it converts in like 3 minutes. So pretty good there. All right, good question. Keep them coming. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is let's just get a HTML file up on Azure and have it load just a static SCS file. That's just that blob file that we download. We're gonna do that using Azure Azure Storage. So that's going to be our first step in this adventure. And let me make sure I have the chat up, so if anybody has questions. So if you could log into your Azure instance, I've actually created one here so I can follow along with you, not a corporate one, but just a kind of, let's say, a personal one. So you sign into that, and the first thing that we want to do is create a storage account. So you have your portal here. We're going to create some app services. A little bit later, you have a lot of other services that you kind of explore, but we're going to work with the storage accounts, virtual machines, and app services today. So I'm going to go to a storage account. I have nothing in here, and I'm going to add a storage account. So that brings me to a couple different parameters here. I need to create a resource group, and that's really just a grouping of like technology. It's a paradigm that Microsoft has. Just says, hey, you want to just manage these assets within your portal together. I'm just going to create a research group, or a resource group call it Hoops Web Platform Training. Just kind of going to create new, call it Hoops Web Platform Training. Call that good. And then storage account name. This needs to be unique. So we have, looks like, 12 or so people that are going to be following along. So the storage account name actually needs to be unique. So if I try to create Hoops Web Platform Training, and you try to, and it actually can't have any dashes. I believe that needs to be unique. So it needs to be unique across all storage accounts in Azure. So if you create the same one, we're going to have a name clash. So I'm just going to prepend this with my company, TS3D. So if you're at Adobe, you call it whatever you want, but this actually is going to be part of our URL. So pick something that's meaningful to you. I'm going to place it in US West. I'm on the West Coast of the US. US West 2, I think, is up in Washington. I'm in Oregon, so we have kind of low latency, not too big of a deal. We're just going to call it standard, general purpose storage, and we're just going to use the rest of the defaults there. And I'm going to hit review and create, and it does take a little while to do this. So I'm going to hit create. And it kind of goes through this deployment process, and we get to kind of wait on it as it's deploying. And this is a great opportunity to kind of chat. If you have any questions or comments. All right, so deployment is complete. So we kind of have created that storage account and a resource group associated with it. We're going to put other things in that resource group in a little bit, but let's go to our resource here. And so now that we have our resource group created, bring my chat up here. Yeah, so a question about, we don't get a big bill. So right now, if you signed up for an account, most services are free. All services are free, I think, for 30 days. And then most services, kind of the generic services, are free for 12 months. We actually are going to go into a paid service in a little bit, but this should be free. And honestly, we're talking about just like cents as well right now. It's when you start getting into virtual machines that things start to get expensive. I know you were kidding, but that sneaks up on you. All right, so I have a 100 megabyte SC file. Does that mean that all 100 megabytes have to be transmitted to Azure, or can you control how much of the data gets transmitted For instance, can you control what won't be transmitted? All right, so you have an SC file. So we do have to put that up on, so there's a couple things and we'll go through that. You have to take your SC file, if you want to make it like available for everybody, you need to upload it to Azure. So you do have to put everything up there to stream. There is a parameter that allows you to minimize how much gets downloaded to the client. There's also ways that you can minimize the size of your SC file. For instance, don't include measurement data. So we have measurement operators that measure edges and circles. So there's ways that we can kind of pare down your file as well. But your 100 megabyte SC file, you can kind of put it up there on the server and then minimize the amount of data coming down. And yes, you can also control the tessellation amount. That has to do with the command line parameter that you set in the conversion. So if I go back to quick start, you'll notice in my convert I'm just kind of a little diversions, but I'll kind of walk you through that. If you look at this easy convert.js file, and I'm going to just inspect that real quick. So here's the file that does the heavy lifting. What you see is a number of command line parameters that get sent to the conversion.exe. And what's not here is the tessellation amount, but you can set the tessellation amount there. These are just a couple of parameters that we expose, but you can set that as well to like low, medium, high. I think there's like probably 8 different tessellation parameters. There's also kind of some advanced ways of working with Communicator. You can create different levels of detail and then swap those out. I just want to show you real quick a different example of how we leverage resource limiting. So here's an example where we set the memory limit to 150 megabytes for this pretty massive, I think on disk, it's like 4 gigabytes worth of data. Is that right? Yeah, it's like 2 to 4. So it's a pretty massive data set here. And this will just, at a certain point, it's just going to stop loading data in, but it's a lot of data coming in. All right, good questions. All right. Yes, that's where we were. We were deploying to Azure. Create a unique name. So the next thing that we want to do is actually push an HTML file up there. So let's take a look at doing that. So I'm going to kind of search here in my portal for static website. So you notice we're in the Hoops Web Platform training storage account. And if I go back, you'll notice here in my kind of recent resources in kind of my home of the portal, I have my resource group that I created, and then my storage account. So these are kind of the main resources that we're working with today. And so now that I'm in my storage account, I'm going to search for web, go to static website, and we're going to enable static websites. And then we're just going to give it some names. Let's say index.html. And then so maybe a 4.4 HTML. We don't have these files yet, but we're just kind of saying these are the files you should look for and load. And we're going to hit save. And what this gives me is 2 primary endpoints. These are going to be again, this is the storage account unique name that I gave. This is Azure kind of hosting. So we're hosting on their domain or the Windows domain. This is all configurable, so you can, using a DNS, map to that, but we're not going to go into that today. So at least we have a unique name that we can hit. When I try to copy that, we haven't uploaded our index.html. Let's see what happens. Yeah, the content doesn't exist, so we got to push something up there. And the way we're going to do that is actually with Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to come in here and let's kind of get some infrastructure set up here. And I have my kind of Azure training folder. I actually have a folder created called static. So you can create a folder like that somewhere on your machine. And the next thing that I'm going to do is just open that folder in Visual Studio Code here. So we're going to open up static, and maybe what I'll do is I'll create a new one just so that we're all on the same page. And I'm going to call this static 2 because we're all working together. So empty folder, select folder. Yeah, I'll save those. All right, so nothing in my folder right now, and nothing in the chat, so that's good. So in addition to Visual Studio Code, what you should also have is installed your Azure extensions here. And I've logged in. It'll probably prompt you to log in as well. So take a minute to do that. If you don't have this installed, if you do, let's see, prerequisites. Wonder, I have it here. Yeah, so one of the prerequisites I sent out was this Node Azure pack that basically gives you access. So I'm going to copy that to the chat just one more time, so you should be able to download that. Throw that in the chat. But now that I'm logged in, what you'll see is the resource groups that I've created, and also the storage accounts. I think, let me just do a refresh here. And I'm not going to worry about my databases or virtual machines. So I have my I'm kind of paired to a couple different accounts, but this is the one that we're working with right now. This Hoops Web Platform Training here, my storage account. So that's here. It's a kind of a extension of that portal. And this is something on my corporate account that I've been working with. So what we need to do is get some files first to play with. And so what I'm going to do as well is I have just a very kind of, in preparation for this, I have a very basic HTML file, and it just happens to be named index.html. This is what it looks like, my first heading and a little bit of text there. I'm going to give this to you guys. So I'm actually going to take this one file. I'm going to come into my folder. I'm going to paste it, but you guys need it. It should also be visible here in VS Code. So I'm going to come back up to my file explorer here, index.html, super simple. I'm going to copy this and place it in the chat, or you can use your HTML code of whatever you like there. If you need to create the file, if you just right click here in my file explorer, right click, select new file, index2.html, creates that file. And then I'm not going to worry about that, but you can place your data in there. And then all I need to do is I come back to my Azure plugin, and I select under my Azure subscription. This is my kind of test subscription. There's a button here. It says deploy to Azure. And it says, okay, what do you want to deploy? And I'm just going to deploy all the contents of that folder that I had created. And then it says, where do you want to, select your subscription? I'm going to select the Azure subscription, and then the storage account in that subscription. And then it says it's deploying. And then it says the deployment is complete, and it pushed it to that. It says that your endpoint where you can view this now is here. So I'm going to hit browse website. Now we're on the internet, and the content of my HTML is visible. So that just shows that I can take an HTML and throw it up on Azure, and it's getting hosted there. How's everybody doing? Okay, great. It worked. Okay. I'm going to close this. That's one. Worked for one person. That's awesome. I'm big time now. All right, let's get some content up there. All right, how's that sound? So I'm going to bring up some window explorers. So here's static 2. So that's in one window, and then I have in my other window. Remember, we were kind of playing with. Looks good. Okay, that's awesome. We're playing with content here from our installation. So we were in Quick Start. Want to make sure that you guys can see this. I also tried to make my screen size big so everyone could see what I was typing. All right, so Quick Start. Here we're in Hoops Communicator. So we need a couple things, right? The first thing that we need is the source, particularly our JavaScript and our HTML. So these are, you can configure these any way you want. So I'm going to grab my HTML and the JavaScript and the CSS. So Hoops Communicator is really just that JavaScript. And you give it an HTML div and it renders into it. But this HTML and the CSS has like the model tree and a bunch of other like just good decoration that kind of shows you a sample app, a reference implementation. Did I not send? Okay, so if you chat, by default, it only goes to the panelists, not all attendees. However, you have to change that desire, right? Text field, I just realized that. That's okay. Yeah, so yeah, Dave, you've just been chatting with me, but that's cool. All right, so I copied in my HTML, my JavaScript, my CSS. I didn't copy in this HWF example or the HWF. That's a different TextSoft file format. We're just not going to work with that today. Not a big deal. So I copied that in, and then also we need our data, right? So we're working with SCS files. So what I'm going to do is grab a few of those. And that happens to be in our Quick Start folder. And if I go to converted models and then go to standard, now the Modo that I had converted was pushed into users, but we kind of ship with some standard files. And I'm going to just take this entire directory as well. I'm going to copy it and paste it in here. So that should be good there. In that it has kind of 6, 1, 7, 7, 8 files as well. All right. And we should be good. All of that, if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you'll now see that all gets populated here. It's right next to index.html. We can rename it if we wanted to. Our SCS files are there, our JavaScript files are there. We don't have a web server kind of set up within Visual Studio Code right now, and I could show you that running locally, but let's just try to push this to Azure. Same thing. I'm just going to take the contents of that folder and push it up to Azure storage. And again, where do you want to deploy from? We're just going to deploy from static. What subscription do you want to use? We're going to use the Azure subscription. So just where's my target up on Azure? The storage account, right? So this is the same thing. It says it exists. Do you want to delete what's there? Yeah, that's fine. And we'll wait for that to deploy. And it's a little more data. We didn't have to push all of that SCS data, but we'll give that a minute. All right. So it's, again, deployed to this container. However, when I go there, let's kind of browse to that website. Remember, it's loading index.html because that still exists, and that's kind of the default HTML file that gets served, but the other files are there. So Hoops Web Viewer sample.html is there in that folder. So it'll serve that to me. And so that file does exist. Now I haven't given it a SCS file to load yet, but the HTML does exist. And so what I'm going to do is add I know this HTML requires query parameters. So I know it's going to be SCS equals, and then we have to give it the path. I remember it was in a folder called SCS models, and let's load micro engine.scs. So it loads the micro engine. And it gives me access to all the files in there, like BNC if I wanted it, Arbolita, or any other SCS file that you pushed up to that folder. So how we doing? I know I can kind of rattle through these things, but to follow along can be pretty, it could be I've followed my colleagues through their training, and it can be a real rush. Now that's kind of where we're gonna land with just a static website. Now, if you wanted to, you can go in and create additional, you can add buttons to this, you can add selection handlers to that HTML file or associated JavaScript files. Worked great. Okay, good. So we're seeing 3D data. So we're done. We're good for the rest of this training class. We deployed some 3D to Azure. So that's kind of, at least we reached that. But I want to kind of take this a step further and show you how to implement more tools within Azure. But if you wanted to, there are you have a lot of flexibility now. You can load multiple files. You can create buttons that kind of push them together. You can create your own UI. If you're a web developer, front end, just go to it and you can build out your web app here. We have this reference app as well. So we're gonna kind of switch gears now and look at app services, and create a slightly more. We're gonna push up a Node.js server, Express server, and try to implement streaming. So we're gonna dig in a little bit deeper. Anybody else get that to work? I'd love to hear from other participants. It looks like Dave was able to get it to work. Great. Okay. Yep. Great. Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is deploy a web page using the Azure App Service. Now, this is kind of in between. App services are between that static website and actually a full-on virtual machine. They are lightweight. You can create an app service. Basically, it's a virtual machine, but it's within a shared space. So like it's running on a server, an Azure server, but there could be other tenants to that server. It's all sectioned off. So you're in your own sandbox. It's also very secure. It's very scalable. And the way in which you push to it is really simple as well. There's a lot of continuous integration, continuous delivery type tools for app services. So we're going to go look at that today. All right, so the first thing is we need to create an app service in the portal. So we're going to create a new service under App Services. We're going to select Add. Under my Azure subscription. And remember, we have a resource group that has already been created, called it Hoops Web Platform Training. In this case, we need an app service name. So again, the domain is a little bit different. I'm going to call it, again, it needs to be unique, TS3D, and then Hoops Web Platform Training. And so that's unique. If you're at, say, Autodesk, it'd be Autodesk Hoops Web Platform Training. And I want to keep things simple. We're going to just publish code. You can also publish Docker containers, so you can Dockerize. And that's great. And we have a lot of tools kind of taking the Hoops Web Platform and Communicator and creating Docker containers that allow for easy deployment there as well. I'm going to select my runtime stack. Again, you could have a Java server, you could have PHP, or you could have a Python server. We're going to be using Node today. I'm going to select Node 12, kind of the latest. You can select any one of those if you really wanted to. And then I'm also going to select Windows because I'm pushing a Windows executable, so I need it to be Windows. But you can do the same thing in Linux as well. And then the region, I want, let's push this to a US2. Now you can replicate these app services. You can replicate them across regions, which is great. So you have low latency. We're just going to push it to one region today. And then the app service plan. So we are going to get into potentially a little bit of billing today. So I am selecting standard. So I actually had to upgrade my account. We'll get into that in a second here. I think can I change it to the free? I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. So we have our, yeah. So if you haven't upgraded, so I have a kind of an upgraded one. I'm going to select this, and that should be what you see. Can somebody confirm that for me? That you see the free F1? Is that what's available to you as you're working with this? Okay. For Dave, that's fine. It looks like you have the free F1. We are going to have to upgrade to a paid one to run the 64-bit executable. So if you have the S1, if you're using the enterprise account, that's stick with that. Like it'll be simpler in the end. Yeah, you have to switch to dev test on top. I just want to, for people that are following along, we're actually going to have to upgrade to the S1. So yeah, change size. So eventually I'm going to go to production and I have to upgrade to S1 to get a few advanced features. But we're going to, just to stick with everybody, we're going to use F1. And then you also have to create an app service plan. So I'm going to hit create new, and we're going to call this, app service plan, Hoops Web. They suggest one, Hoops Web Platform Training. Okay. And I'm going to delete all of these resources at the end. You kind of go through and knock them down. So far, everything will be free. I'll tell you when we start incurring costs, but it's not going to be expensive. So then I go and I create that, and it's going to take a second. It has to create the plan, and then it has to create the app service. And then it has to deploy it. So it's going to take a little while. And I am going to go back to here. In fact, yeah, I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and from the menus, I'm going to create a terminal, and I'm going to start running some command line stuff here. So I'm going to go to, this is my directory where I had static, but I have kind of a couple projects here in training. So while we're waiting for that to deploy, we need to do a few things and start creating our project to deploy. So what I first want to make sure is that you have access to NPM. So if you type Node Package Manager, NPM, you should see some information there that just basically the help. Make sure that it's installed on your machine and in your path. And the next thing we want to do is actually create some framework for our website. So I'm going to use something called the Express generator. And NPM fails. Well, let's see. If you do this, Dave, I could need to install that. Yeah, NPM, usually when you install Node.js, NPM is installed with it, I believe, or when you installed NPM, Node.js is installed. But yeah, you will need the Node package. You will need the Node package manager. So maybe, oh, yeah, hopefully it was just restarting Visual Studio Code. We'll wait. Awesome, it's working. Great to hear that. All right, so let's scaffold a project. So I'm going to type npm install. I'm going to install a package, and it's called Express generator, and then G for global. So Express generator, G for global. It's already installed on my machine, but you'll need it. So it pulls that package and makes it available to me locally. And then the next thing I'm going to do is actually create a project. So I'm going to call, now that the Express generator has been installed, I'm going to call Express, and I need to give it a name. So we're going to call it John. That's me. And then let's call it John 3D app. And there's kind of different ways different templates that you can use that are more or less shorthand for writing HTML. I'm going to use the EJS template. for the Express generator. So /view space EGS. All right, so it looks like, yeah, it created a bunch of files for me and several folders. So if I do a directory, you'll notice that John 3D app is in there, a new directory that was generated. If I do change directory, John 3D app, gives me a bin folder, a public folder, a routes folder, a views folder, an app.js, and then a package JSON. One note, you have to enable running PowerShell scripts from the command line on your machine to be able to run Express. Okay, thanks for that. And even though this Express kind of template has been created, package.json, I'm gonna actually open up here in my open a folder. So now that I'm gonna kind of navigate to that folder in Visual Studio Code. And under, yeah, so I have all my folders, I have my app.js. Package.json includes a couple dependencies. So if I go to my terminal here, we're still in that folder, these dependencies need to get installed. So I'm just gonna do that with npm install. So this is kind of like boilerplate npm packages. Anytime you download a node package, you run npm, and that creates, kind of loads all of these dependencies in this folder called node modules. Set execution policy remote signs. So we have a few people following along. Well, you have to run it once, your machine, you can run PowerShell scripts. Okay, probably a security setting. Yeah, I tried to flush this out for everybody as much as possible, but you do need to enable these PowerShell scripts. So I ran npm install. Just a quick tour. So app.js, this is a JavaScript file that runs our Express server. You notice here that Express constructor is called, and then we start attaching to it. So if we kind of ask for the server index, it routes to something called the index router. If we ask for, let's say, the user's endpoint, it routes to this user router. So you have these different routes, and this is pretty common for Express, is to have routes. Basically, what the route does is say, hey, render this page, and this page is in EJS, which is really an HTML. So when the Express server is running and you ask for the index page, it goes to the route renders a page. Pretty simple. Let's see it working. So what I'm going to do is go up to start debugging, and I'm going to select Node.js to start running. And it runs node.exe, and it runs this kind of startup file called www, which www then runs app.js. So we're just running node. That's defined, I believe, also in my package.json. And what I should be able to do is, now that it's running, if I come to my browser window and I type in localhost 3000, so it's running on port 3000 right now. I'll kind of show you where that's coming in. It gives you your your default web page, index.ejs. If I come back to my app here and I look at index.ejs, I could add something here as well. Let's say h2, say foobar, save it, go back, refresh, it gets served up. So I can edit my my HTML and add content there. So let's. All right, thanks, Dave. You have to run. I'll create a record. This is being recorded, so I'll show you how to push that up to. You can kind of follow along with the rest of this. But yeah, great having you. Let's push this Express server up to Azure. And before I do that, I just want to show you what it's listening to. So if I come back to my app here, what it does, I think in app.js actually is in this www. It asks, where am I running? Am I running on localhost? If I'm running on localhost, map to port 3000. If I'm not, it kind of does this map to whatever port that I'm on, which could be 8080 for HTTP or 443 for HTTPS. One last thing before we do this, we need a file, and I'm gonna post it here in the chat, because, well, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna show you a failure mode, and then we'll give you the file. So the next thing is we go back to Azure. And in this case, come on, Azure. We have our app service. And remember, I created something called the 3D Hoops Web Platform training in my Azure subscription. And the same way, like I'm going to just push this to Azure App Service. So this is what's great about app services is the CI/CD pipeline. I'm going to push John 3D app. I'm going to push it to the subscription, and then this app, this 3D Hoops Web Training app. And you can also, I'm going to deploy. You can also, within Visual Studio Code, you can push content to you can create new app services even within that. And then always deploy. I'm going to say yes. I'm just going to deploy this workspace up there. And it's going to take a second to deploy. I'm also going to throw a file here in the chat that we are going to need. So get downloading that. It says deployment is complete. Let's browse website. We're going to open it here. And we get an error. Don't have permission to view this directory or page. So just don't worry about that. That's expected. I'll go into that. But what I do want to show you is what happened. So if I go here in my app service, go home, go to app services, you notice this app service is running. Remember, we deployed that. We built it here in the portal. And I'm just going to go to console. You don't have to follow along with this, but it's kind of far down on the left panel. This gives me a quick view into this sandbox that I'm pushing data to. So I'm going to hit directory. And this is a version of Windows running. I also have like some Linux commands to have access to. It's like an interesting flavor. I think it might be Dockerized. It's multi-tenant, but it's kind of in this sandbox. The good news is I have some things installed automatically. I can't install things. I can push content here, but I can't install like my own like full-on application. Visual Studio redistributables are installed. Node is installed because we chose to have Node installed. So you kind of have a few things at your fingertips, but you'll notice like all of this has been added. We have app.js, we have our bin, our Node modules are there, but we need to tell Azure what to do when we push content there and where to find basically my W file that runs my application. And so that's the file that I sent to you guys, this web.config file. And what I'm going to do is go to the John 3D app folder and just put that web config into that folder. So we're going to go to, I have a local copy of that myself. So I'm just going to take a copy of that and put it in here. And basically it's a config file that tells Azure where to find and how to deploy. And then I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code and do the same thing. I'm just going to do a deploy up to Azure. And you'll notice, I'm going to hit cancel. You'll notice that that file is now, should be, yep, here in my root. So I'm going to hit deploy. And so it should deploy. And now we're going to browse website, open. And our Express server is now running on the Azure App Service, and it's serving up this HTML file that we have. Great. Now we have the structure to put in some 3D content, particularly running. We want to be running the running Hoops Communicator. So I'm going to close at least that and close this, and we should be good there. So let's do that. Let's start putting some content in there. Was anybody able to get that up and running? Up on Azure? Anybody successful? Great. Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Just want to bring up my notes here. All right. So next thing that we need to do is start adding our communicator code, and let's just do it. We're going to do it locally, and then we're going to push up to the cloud. So the next thing that I'm going to do is come in here to Visual Studio Code, come to index.ejs, and we want to reference Hoops Communicator. Now, I want to keep this simple and kind of show you a few things about Communicator. So we're not going to use that whole HTML with all the buttons and the model browser. We just want to keep it really, really simple. So I'm gonna throw some code here in the chat that shows you how to do that. And so you should be able to, let me first paste it here. And I'm gonna take out that code. I think endpoint, call local host 1 80 is my endpoint. All right, so I'm going to take this and I'll walk through it, but this is what we need. And it looks like all of that got pushed to the chat, which is good. All right, so what's happening here? I want to kind of walk through that just a little bit. And we do have to edit one thing, that's okay. So basic HTML document, we are asking for the Hoops Web Viewer kind of engine. And I've pushed, or we have this up in a content delivery network. So instead of pulling it locally, we have a bunch of versions up on a CDN that we reference. So we don't have to like copy it into our project or push it up to Azure Web Services. We could copy the JS. That's fine. Next thing I'll kind of talk you through what we're doing here in a minute. But when the window loads, we create a copy of the communicator web viewer. We tell it stream data from this endpoint, open this model, and put it in this particular location on the page. So in HTML, we have a div, we give it an ID called content. So we render into this div, which is basically the whole page. One thing you do have to change, and I apologize for this, is 2021 should be 2020 because that's the current version I'm running. Now, I'm going to close this. This was our conversion. I'm just going to close this window. Now you should still have the stream cache server running. Now you may or may not. And if you remember, that is here, if it's not running, in the distribution of the Hoops communicator, go to Quick Start and run start server, because right now we need to get our data from somewhere, and I haven't implemented data streaming within the Express server. So we're just going to use this data streaming server for now. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. So start server is running. This new HTML is implemented. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to go to run, start debugging again. I'm going to use Node to run the server. And what I should do is come to here. I'm going to open up localhost again, 3000. And I should get my 3D model. Now there's no buttons on the bottom, no tree here, but that just shows you kind of like the bare bones Hoops communicator rendering of this, and it has some basic functionality to it. All right, so Hoops communicator is running locally, but we're streaming from a server that's not part of our package yet. That's a problem. So let's get that kind of into our server and running. So let's do that. Close my window, come back here, and we need a couple things. We need our data, we need our server. So let's copy a few things in there. So I have my two windows here again. And so here's my application. And I'm going to create a new folder, and let's call it models. And I'm going to open that up, and I got to put some data in there. So let's go to our converted models, go to standard, go to SC models, and let's pull in, let's say BNC and micro engine. All right. So we have our models that we're going to stream at some point. And then I'm also going to create a new folder. We're going to call it, I'm just going to call it Win64 because there's a bin folder already. Go to Win64. and we got to bring in all of our kind of our executable server that can stream that data via a WebSocket. So here I'm back in our distribution, and I go to server, and I go to bin, I go to Win64, and I'm just going to take all of this content here. I'm going to copy that, copy it into this folder. So now we have the data, and we have our server. So the last thing that we need to do is actually run that. So how are we going to do that? So we're asking to run on localhost here, but that's going to cause us some problems in the future, because I'm going to tell you on the Azure App Services, they don't allow ports to be accessible as an endpoint other than HTTP port 8080 and HTTPS port 443. So the app service, once we push this to Azure, is going to block 11.180. We need to be able to proxy it using a proxy service that kind of maps an HTTP endpoint to a WebSocket endpoint on the server. And we're going to do that within, so the first thing we need to do is actually add access to proxy. So I'm going to type here in my terminal, I'm going to do npm install http proxy save. So that installs the package for proxying. Okay. And then I'm going to go to my bin and start using that. So I'm going to type two things here. I'll put these in the chat. And let's throw this in the chat. So you don't have to type that in. I create an instance of this HTTP proxy. I create it, turn WebSockets to true because that's how we communicate the streaming data. It creates this object called proxy, and we're going to have to use that. And I'm going to put a little more code here in the chat. I'll show you how that works. Okay. And we're going to put this like around line 34. We're going to proxy to port 11.180, which is what an instance of the Streamcache server is running on. Now we haven't kicked off the Streamcache server. It's still running here. I had to manually execute it. I'll show you how to do that in just a second, but we need to do this proxy, and it's happening on the upgrade. And so I actually don't have to do anything too crazy. I can be running here. I can ask localhost. Right now we're running on 3000, which is HTTP. We'll change that in a little bit. But when we request on this particular port, it runs the upgrade and from HTTP to WebSockets when it's asking for that data, and it gets proxied down to this port. So I'm going to come up here again. I'm going to save. I'm going to run Node.js. And come back here and open up localhost 3000. And it looks like we got an error. Let me see here. Failed during the handshake. Let's see what we got. I'm going to just close my server real quick. Maybe that port is not responding, so we're just going to give it a second. Going to start that back up and come back here. Failed. It's in running 2021. Failed the handshake. Let's just see what I am running. Just it doesn't seem like that port is accessible. All right, let's pull down this. I'm just gonna go to a clean state so that maybe something didn't terminate properly. And I'm gonna close this guy, close that guy, bring it back up. All right, so that should be running. Start debugging. Run this guy. Go back to localhost 3000. Okay. Yeah, there we go. So I had something bound to that port that was lingering. So we were able to get that running. So we're able to proxy. So that allows me to at least run this on Azure. So that's good. However, we're still kind of running this guy, which isn't ideal. So what we also need to do is run the executable that we had in our package. So the last thing that I need to do is create kind of using Express, spin up the TS3D string cache server instance. So I'm going to come back to my files here, and where I was in this upgrade request, before we upgrade and provide this endpoint, what we want to do is spin up an instance of the TS3D server. And we do that with a node package called child process. And again, I'm going to type this in the chat for you. But here in www, which is a JavaScript file, we require child process. And in this case, we spin up our child process. So I am going to come down here, and in my server upgrade, I'm going to run this child process, and I'm going to give you this in the chat as well. Ooh, that is a lot of characters. So, yeah, so it includes this license key. So you're going to need your license key. I'm going to just delete this license key because it's too many characters for the chat. There's like a hard limit of 1,000 characters. So how am I going to do that? Yeah, what I'll do is I'll give it to you in 2 pieces. So this is kind of like the first piece, license, and then this is the second piece just for your reference. And then you should have the license. Where are you going to get that? You can pull the license file. If you look here in Quick Start, I think it might even be in configure, server config. Yeah. Yeah, so your license file will be down here at the bottom of serverconfig.js. And so you need that license file to stream data. We didn't need the license file just to generate the SCS, but you do need it to stream the data. So what's this doing? It's spawning this child process, our executable. It's giving it some command line arguments, gives it the license file. It gives it a unique ID. So each of these processes, you can have unique IDs for each of them. You manage that. I threw in something called 123. It also tells you where to find the models and then what port to run on. We're currently running on 11180. It could be anything that you, well, not anything. Try to keep with 11180 and above, but you can create those port mappings. A little bit of console logging if you exit, or if you get some data, or if you get an error. Not a lot is getting thrown out by this TS3D SC serve. If I run that in my console, it gives you all the command line arguments. There's kind of like logs, and if I wanted to render using server side rendering, I can do that. But what that gives me is it kind of has spun up this TS3D serve listening on port 11180. So then I can proxy to it and receive data from it. So that's good. And the last thing, and this is important, is let me just pull this last thing up. Yeah, let me go here, Visual Studio Code. I need one last thing. Sometimes from a cold start, and we need to check that this actually is running TS3D serve. And the best way I could figure that out is just to wait for a second. Well, not even a second, wait for half a second. So what I'm going to do is just add a little timer right here and bind it there. So what this does is it just waits while that child process is getting set up, waits 150 milliseconds. So blink of the eye. I'm going to save all this. I'm going to make sure that this server is no longer running. So kind of exit out because it potentially is bound to port 11180. Going to stop running locally. This is saved. Going to hit run, start debugging Node.js. So it's running. going to come here and go to localhost 3000. And it's now asking me, hey, do you want to make sure your firewall is complaining, which is fine. I'm going to allow access. And so now within that process, it's streaming, which is great. We were able to get it running locally. Now what we need to do is push it to Azure. And I do recognize we're a little over time here. Thanks for sticking with me, everybody. That's fantastic. We got just a few more things to finish up here. Before we push to Azure, though, we need to enable a few things. Now that, by default, this Azure instance sandbox is 32-bit. So we do need to upgrade to 64-bit to be able to run that child process. So in order to do that, I'm back here in app services, my one particular app service, training app service. I'm going to go to configuration. And I'm going to go to general settings. And I'm going to upgrade to 64-bit. Now, you may not have that ability. It could give you a little rocket ship here and say you need to upgrade. And then up at the top, it'll say, if you want to upgrade, click here. And then from there, you upgrade to an S1. That gives you access to 64-bit. So you need to do that to be able to run this child process. We also need to enable WebSockets. So I'm going to hit enable WebSockets, turn that on, and hit save, and hit continue. So that's going to take a second to upgrade my instance. There's two other things that I need to do before we kind of roll with this. And that's back in my code. So I'm going to bring this up. Back in my code here, we're going to go to my app. I'm going to change this to 500 milliseconds, not 1500, just in case, because I know sometimes from a cold start, it does take a little bit longer to get my child process running. I also know that because we're running from the www folder, just my paths need to be changed a little bit. So I'm going to go down a directory. So when we run on the server, for some reason, it runs from the bin folder as opposed to the root. So we're gonna just make sure that we have our paths corrected. And then the last thing is 3000 isn't available. So we're gonna, good. So this is index.ejs. We're gonna just use host here, which is because we're not running on localhost, it's host name. So it's my URL. We're going to try to ask for a WebSocket from the URL endpoint. It's going to upgrade and then proxy. So a lot there. We should be good. If I come back to app services, it looks like that's all stuck. So let's deploy. Let's go here, go back to my Azure plugin, and we're going to hit deploy. We're going to deploy. And it's pushing that out. It'll take a few seconds. And we still have people in attendance, so thanks so much for being part of this program today. Really do enjoy working with our community. So I'm going to browse website. I'm going to hit copy. And I'm going to come up here to our website, and I'm going to paste it this time instead of just launching it. We haven't enabled HTTPS, so we don't have a security certificate. We don't have secure WebSocket, so I'm going to run on HTTP, unsecure. And so now we're able to, we kind of explicitly said, load the micro engine, load on this one port. We're running on Azure, deploying a 3D model. So there you have it. There's a lot left up to you guys to kind of work through. So obviously I probably want a mapping here between instances of the TS3D server and my port and my ID. Probably a way to load a model, not just micro engine, but any model, because here in index.ejs, I mean, I can probably change this to be, I can change it to BNC here and then push this back up to app services and load the BMC, but there's a lot of stuff you can do. And that's really kind of my call to action. We're going to kind of take things down for a landing, a couple minutes late, but I'm going to record this. I'm going to post it to our YouTube channel. You can kind of walk through, if you didn't get a chance to do that earlier, and see kind of how to do this yourself on app services. We didn't get to deploying to a virtual machine. That was probably a lot to bite off today. But we have a forum, techsoft3d.com, and there's a new thread in there called community projects. I'm going to post kind of what I'm working on to that, but I'm really interested in what you guys have to do around Hoops Communicator and your web apps. So in the next week or so, if you could post maybe a link to your app service, I'd love to see that, or your static website, and just share it with other people who are present here. We have a few other training classes too coming up. So in March is going to be a really big month. We have JavaScript promises, so digging into how to use JavaScript, particularly around Hoops Communicator. So that's a JavaScript paradigm. If you're coming from desktop development, it's kind of interesting to see how to use promises asynchronously. And then some like really big events. Kind of our annual product update and happy hour is happening on the 10th. You can register for the training class on JavaScript promises on our website. We haven't posted the product update and happy hour yet on our website as an event, but it's a pretty big deal. We're talking about all of our technology, some newer technology that we acquired last year around analysis. It's not going to be just for web, but it's going to be all of our different SDKs. We'll be hosting the same session twice, once in Europe and once in the US. I think it's 7 a.m. Pacific, but that's going to come out shortly. And then something new, sorry about that, the Hoops Developer Day is a half-day program focused on developers. And so we'll have a keynote from our VP of engineering talking about Agile at TechSoft 3D and what that transformation has looked like as of late. An hour of demos. If you have something cool you want to show off, you get 5 or 10 minutes to do a demo of your stuff. And so we have a power hour of demos, and then we'll break out into some training and some specific training around the Hoops web platform at 10, or the Hoops native platform, an hour and a half session for each of those running in tandem, as well as some sessions where people can connect with our product managers and our consulting team. So some great stuff coming up in the next month, and then other events throughout the year. So hopefully you found that informative, using Azure and using the Hoops web platform. I'm done. What I want to do is the developer day that is live. Let me throw that in the chat as well. It's not accessible yet, but it is live. So I'm going to throw those two links in the chat here, so you can register for our events. But man, I just talked for like an hour 45. Thanks for letting me do that. Any questions before we get going? Feel free to push that into the chat. All right, going once, going twice. All right, well, I guess that's it. Thanks everyone for spending time with us today, and look forward to seeing you maybe next month, maybe later this year. But we're going to close up shop. I do hope you have a good rest of the week, and take care.